Hello everybody and welcome back to another Sail and Chat episode, and today it's going to be a little bit different as I'll be reviewing Battlefleet 2. The kind folks over at Mythical City Games has sent me a code and a couple to give away. So how's the game, you ask? Is it fun to play? Well, hopefully at the end of the review you'll have a pretty good idea what I think about the game and whether or not it's something you should go and try out. So let's go over to the things that are obviously visible on the opening screen, which is there's a single player campaign and then there's multiplayer. Multiplayer available in both hot seat to play with a friend, or you can go online and play with the big wide world out there. Single player, however, is obviously what most of us are going to be doing because, well, let's go mess around against the computer. You have two options right now, and they have expanded the campaigns recently. There is a Pacific campaign and an Atlantic campaign, which is quite cool. You either start with a fleet already that is built and everything, or you can start with a clean slate, and that means you have to build up your own fleet with prestige, which is the currency that is provided to you, and you can gain that every turn and through battles. So there's, if the Pacific campaign, you can pick either the US or Japan, which is kind of cool, and you get to pick the difficulty settings. The difficulty settings provides I guess certain differences in terms of how well the AI aims, and also what kind of markers you get to help assist you in aiming. Once you've decided on your difficulty setting, you're shown the actual map that you're going to be playing on, and it reminds me a lot of Axis and Allies, the board game, where you control a number of zones, the enemy controls a number of zones, and you're trying to take over all of their zones. And depending on how many zones you can capture, they provide a certain number of prestige per turn. Since I started with a blank slate, I have to build my own fleet. So in terms of ship selection, it's very varied. You have everything from frigates all the way to carriers, and there's submarines in the game as well. There's a lot of things, and the fleet compositions are very varied. However, in terms of actual customization, I thought it was really light. There is some things you can do to make your ships a little bit better at certain things. So for example, in this case I wanted my cruisers to have more anti-aircraft guns, and so there is that option to equip them with AA. If I wanted them to have, let's say, torpedoes as their secondaries, I can do that as well. Nevertheless, in terms of customization options, it is a little bit on the light side. One other thing that I would actually like to see is, if you're going to customize your weapons, maybe also the ability to customize other things about your ship. Perhaps engines to determine movement range, or armor to determine how much damage you could potentially mitigate, things like that. I think all those things would help nicely just to make the customization aspect more in-depth. Still, a lot of the emphasis in this game is put on fleet composition rather than individual unit customization. So you don't want to just say go into battle with only cruisers and destroyers, for example, because in the event you run into an aircraft carrier, you might be in quite a bit of trouble. You also don't want to run in there with all battleships, because in the event you run into submarines, there's definitely problems there. Submarines can really ruin your day, as I found out, much to my surprise at one point in time when I thought I had the thing in the bag. I had a destroyer. I was like, yeah, I see the submarine. Submarine comes over, torpedoes me, and like completely wrecked me. So yeah, there are those moments in the game where you're like, oh, I can't believe that happened. Anyhow, so here I am, like, equipping my battleship again. You see that I tend to like to equip a lot of anti-aircraft, and that's because carriers in this game are really strong. And at times I think that the carriers might even be a little bit too strong. They are very dominant, and they have their ways of utterly just ruining your day. So, anyway, so I've got sort of a fleet going here, carrier, cruiser, and battleship. So a little bit later on, I've now kind of got my fleet going to different areas, taking different objectives, and I see an enemy fleet comprised of 7 ships, and I decide to go and fight. So I send in a transport, 2 cruisers, a destroyer, and the carrier. And in the case you're wondering what happened to my battleship, well, there was something a little bit frustrating about this game, and I'll get to that in a second. So the enemy team deploys sort of to the south, I'm deployed to the north. And how the game works is a little bit like Worms. First you move your ship, then you select your weapon system, then you aim your shot, and then you fire. And hopefully, if your aim is true, you will hit stuff. So I'm moving a cruiser right now. Moved it a little bit. Select my forward guns. Now you'll see that there's a blue circle there. That's 2000 range. It's predetermined. If you're playing on the easier difficulty, you get an extra circle. So that would help make your shots a little bit easier. But of course I'm playing on the normal difficulty, so I'm only going to get this one circle. So I fire my first shot and I range it, and I see that, hey, you know what? My shot landed actually pretty close to the carrier. And so I fired another shot at the carrier. Now this is what I mean when I was talking about things that were a little bit frustrating with the game. Sometimes you spawned way too close to things. And on like the very first turn, before you could even react sometimes, you're already under attack. That's actually what happened to the battleship that's no longer present in my fleet, because I happened to be attacking a different map and I spawned within range of a piece of coastal artillery, and quite literally on the first turn, before I could even control my ship, the coastal artillery knocked out my main gun, which like took away 33% of my firepower before I could even do anything. So that part I think can be really, really frustrating with the game. Still, there is a lot to like about this game, as in the actual engagements are actually quite fun. When you actually get to fighting the enemy ships, they are fun, especially the ones that can actually shoot back. Also, carriers are really, really strong. Did I mention that? I mentioned that earlier. Carriers are really strong in the game, and there's a reason why I equipped all the cruisers with anti-aircraft, because there were times, again, that first round problem, where literally on the very first turn, a carrier bombed my cruiser, and by some degree of RNG, my cruiser had its rudder knocked out, and then I couldn't steer the entire game. So yeah, there are those little things that will kind of drive you nuts in this game. And those are little things that hopefully, I mean, you know, with time they will fix. Still, the fun part. The fun part is blowing stuff up, and you know, the ranging shots, that's, you know, initially going to be quite difficult, as you're not really going to know where the shots are going to go. But eventually, as you play this game more and more, you're going to get a better and better feel of where the shots are going to land. And nothing's more satisfying than landing a massive salvo on stuff and watching just the entire ship get devastated. So, in this engagement here, the enemy team, while they have more ships, a lot of them are transports. Now, transports are kind of interesting. They have very, very little actual combat value, but what they do is they allow your fleet, after sinking everything and destroying everything, to capture territory that have land in them. So in this particular map, which is open ocean, the transports don't really do anything, but in the event that I was playing on a map where there's an island to capture, I need transports to do that. So primarily I'm basically going to be fighting a cruiser, a carrier, and a destroyer. As you can tell, I got lucky because I was able to damage that aircraft carrier early on. So here we go. Enemy airstrike came in. I did some damage to their planes, but I lost an AA gun. AA gun's not really all that important. It's important to defend yourself, but in the grand scheme of things, your rudder, your bridge, your main guns, way more important things, because those actually allow your ship to fight. So here we go. I've got two cruisers against the one in the aircraft carrier, and of course that carrier is in range, so fun times. One little thing that I wish the game had is with the movement part, I wish there was some sort of like indicator, like if you went at this angle and went this distance, here is where you would end up, because there have been times where I misjudged a turn, or I overestimated a turn, and I ended up in like, you know, like running my ships into islands or running my ships into other ships, and that's not much fun. Anyways, pretty much on, I guess, turn 2, I'm already going to be able to take out the enemy carrier, and by doing so, I'm going to make life a lot easier for myself. And that's also the other thing, in case you've noticed on the map how far apart some ships can spawn. And it would be nice if the whole concept of actually having a fleet were actually realized in terms of where your ships are placed at the start of a battle, as in they're more together as a fleet rather than really spread apart, because sometimes it really takes a couple of turns to even bring your ships somewhat close together into that sort of a fleet. And if that was maybe done, then carriers won't be the overpowering force that they are in the game right now, because You know, in the event you have a battleship, which I think actually costs more in the game, you know, run into a carrier, the battleship is pretty screwed. Not much you can do. So that is something that I hope eventually gets addressed a little bit more, and to just sort of bring ships into a little bit better balance. Aside from that, however, the actual play aspect of the game is quite fun. It is a lot of fun to shoot at ships with your guns and to land that beautiful hit and to do massive amounts of damage. Torpedoing things is also extremely satisfying. So here we go. I'm in a destroyer and I'm going to engage the enemy destroyer, and this is the part I like the most about the game, is the satisfaction of killing the enemy ship and actually sending it to the bottom. That is an incredibly satisfying thing to do. So first things first, I'm going to fire one shot, sort of a ranging shot, to see if I've got the shells in the right place. Good, the ranging shot's perfect. So the next thing I do is I'm going to do a salvo fire, which is I'm going to fire all my guns at the same time. And you see that the damage numbers are just like, yes. So I'm going to expend my ammunition. I'm going to fire my guns at the ship. And I'm going to just try to like nail them with as much gun damage as possible. And then resorting to torpedoes afterwards. There are arcs for everything, which means that in this game it is actually very, very important to go broadside to the enemy ships. That is actually very, very important to bring all of your guns and all of your weapons to bear. And torpedoes, super satisfying. There is something about that beep, 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 beep thing that is just like, oh yes, love it. So anyways, I've taken care of the enemy destroyer with my destroyer, and now the enemy transports are fleeing for their lives. Cruisers is even more boom. Like with cruisers, there's even more of that boom than there is with destroyers. And if you can land their beautiful cruiser salvos, it is just such an awesome thing. So there we go. There's the enemy cruiser over there. I've aimed my guns. I'm pretty confident that my aim is actually pretty good now. So I decided to just go full salvo on the first shot. Normally you might want to, you know, offer ranging salvo. So I just feel confident enough to go full salvo and just watch this. It's glorious. Bam! And there it goes. Massive amounts of damage everywhere. Took out a bunch of important weapon systems. Super, super satisfying. And that's the thing I really enjoyed about this game, is that, you know, a lot of times you're like ranging shot, and you do a little bit of damage, and then finally when you like get that one great hit and you nail stuff, incredible amounts of fun and incredible amounts of satisfaction to be able to do that. And overall, while the battles occasionally do have those frustrating moments that I mentioned earlier, you know, you spawning too close to stuff, or just having like important parts of your ship knocked out and then your ship basically loses a nice chunk of its functionality, aside from those few kind of annoying things, the game fundamentally, at least in the battle phase, is quite fun. There is that degree of intensity in this game where, you know, your ship against the enemy ship and you have to make every shot count, and when you miss it's like, oh, I missed that, and then, you know, you have things knocked out, and when you fire back, or maybe you land that beautiful shot and things blow up. There is that fun factor in the battle part. Still, I'm not saying that it's perfect. There are things that I wish were done better in the game, especially even in the battle phase. There are things that I wish could be done a little bit better. One, maybe repairs. Maybe have the ability to, you know, not have your rudder get knocked out once and then you're left without steering for that one ship for the rest of the game. Maybe another thing to have in the game, maybe is to spawn the ships a little bit closer together and have an actual fleet-on-fleet engagement where there's some maneuver and positioning. And yes, in case you saw that salvo, oh my god, I love that feeling of that game where you're just like, calculated it, it's perfect, the shells land, and just massive damage. That is fantastic. But like, anyways, going back to what I said earlier, there are those little things that I wish would be better in the game, you know, whether that be the positioning of ships and make the positioning a more important element, or maybe just have some degree of variance in shooting, maybe have a wind gauge or something, you know, something to make shots that you have to adjust differently, you know, just something to add a little bit more to the gameplay besides just simple, you know, direction, range, fire, right? I mean, it is incredibly satisfying, like I said, to actually land the shots, but it would be nice to have that slight different element to it. And the final thing I really want to talk about is replayability value of this game. I've played it for about 8 hours, and I'm starting to find that around this point, the game starts to get a little bit repetitive, and I would like to see a little bit more depth overall, especially on the global map portion. Just more depth there to add that replayability factor. Maybe instead of just making it large zones where it's fleet on fleet, maybe you have more smaller zones that you have to run transports through. So instead of transports only having one job of capturing an island or something, maybe have it so that you have to resupply certain islands and you have to run transports. So maybe there, frigates might have more of a job. Maybe submarines would be able to do a job that they're actually designed for, which is more convoy destruction. So those kinds of things would all be elements in this game I think would make it that much better. Still, I do have to point out that Mythical City Games is a small developer, and so, a lot of these things is going to take them some time in order to implement. Still, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, fundamentally, the game is fun. They have a lot of the core elements down in place that make for a fun game. Still, there are things that they can continue to work on to improve this game so that it can go from a pretty solid game to a great game that has a lot of replayability and something that I would enjoy playing on my free time. The game is currently available on Steam for $14.99 US, although I do believe there is a sale going on Steam, so you might be able to get this game on sale. One other thing is I do have 3 codes to give away, so please do check the video description below, as I have put a link to a raffle there, so please enter it, and I'll announce the winners on my next video. Aside from all that, I hope you enjoyed this video review of Battlefleet 2. If you've played it and you want to share some opinions, please leave those in the comment section below. Have a good one, and I'll talk to all of you again soon.